Hello, welcome to the third module of Connecting Neighbors. Ready congregations. What are ready congregations? Well, in this module we're going to be focusing on identifying at least one disaster ministry that your church may be willing and able to implement before and or after a disaster impacts your community. And the first thing that you need to do to figure out if you have ready congregation is to identify those people who are willing and capable to respond and how they may be able to do that. What are their gifts and graces? This may be different, or it may be the same group that you identified to be able to respond to a disaster or an emergency that occurs in your church. But now our focus is out into the community. Embrace that overlap and use it to the best that you can. Record those skills and assets. Write it down. Have a list. Have a means of contacting them. Provide opportunities for learning and practice in that ministry that you decide. But the most important thing in a disaster is be the church. When disaster strikes your community is going to look to the local churches for comfort and care. Understand that each community owns their own disaster. The disaster starts locally, it ends locally. And your church is an integral part of the fabric and culture of your community. Your church has much to offer and to receive by investing time, talent, gifts, service, and witness in your community's recovery if disaster strikes. Ask yourself, what might people need? Ask yourself, what do we have to offer? It might be volunteer cleanup teams, or you may decide to form an early response team. You may be involved in delivering relief supplies. You may be involved in doing needs assessment and damage assessment in your community. You may have chosen to be a shelter. You may choose to be a volunteer reception or coordination point. You can be a warming or cooling station, a charging station, an evacuation station. You might provide community meals and fellowship. You may expand existing child care or children's ministry on a temporary basis to minister to the children and give the adults opportunity to deal with things like insurance and repairs. Your church could be a communications hub, gathering information and disseminating information to the various groups involved in disaster response. We should never plan to work in a vacuum. Working with other agencies and organizations in your community will promote shared resources and information. It will eliminate duplicated efforts and allow us to know where help is actually needed. What are some of your community partners? Well, we start with faith-based partners, other United Methodist churches, either in our communities, our county, or nearby counties. Other local denominations, interfaith organizations, ministerial alliances, or the Salvation Army. There are government organizations that we can partner with and work with, such as emergency management, your local first responders, You may have housing and urban development in your community, the Department of Social Services, the Council on Aging, your economic development agency for the area, or waste management. And there are nonprofit and civic groups that you could partner with. Food pantries, clothing closets, self-help programs, the American Red Cross, the United Way. You can partner with community businesses, community schools or colleges. But the crucial key in developing a disaster response ministry is getting out before the disaster and identifying and developing these relationships for ministry opportunities before the disaster occurs. Connect with voluntary organizations active in disaster, VOAD. VOAD is national and state in scope, and in some places in our conference on a county basis. What VOAD does is it negotiates and establishes standards, principles, and guidance. It establishes points of consensus and provides coordination of disaster response between all of its member agencies. The United Methodist Church, through UMCOR, is one of the main members on a national basis, but it is a member of many. Be empowered by our church connections. The United Methodist Committee on Relief, UMCOR, provides training, mentoring, materials, and much more. United Methodist Volunteers in Mission help you coordinate volunteers and volunteer management. Other United Methodist Church conferences can provide disaster-related information, sample plans, material support, and experience. United Methodist Church and Society will help focus on social justice and disaster response. United Methodist men and women are a source of both experience and volunteers and contacts. They know people. One of the things that any church can do immediately after a disaster as a ministry is a neighborhood walkabout. This is an outreach that any church can do, but you have to wait until it is safe to be able to move around and local officials give permission for people to return to their homes. What does it do? It provides information and referral to survivors in the early relief phases of a disaster. It gathers information. These volunteer navigators are a community-based volunteer ministry during the early days of a disaster. They receive just-in-time training. They empower caring volunteers. And it encourages church leadership and those volunteers to start the response to the survivors by providing needed information as a gesture of care and a sign of hope. Now, what do these volunteer navigators do? First and foremost, they offer a visible presence and a caring outreach. They provide accurate and timely information. They offer referrals to available resources. And they gather categorical information, such as address and visible damages. This information is shareable with other local response and ministry groups. It's not entered into a web-based data collection system. Now, how do they operate? What is the context? First of all, it's short-term. Depending on the scope of the disaster, it may be an afternoon, a single day, or a couple of days' work. They do no crisis counseling or detailed structural assessment. Neither do they make promises. There are no forms for the survivors to complete. It is faith-based, not governed by outside agency. It's done when it is safe to walk about, and it's done by volunteers who can be a volunteer navigator. Volunteers from your local community. It's preferred that they be associated with the church, willing to participate in the orientation, and able to be compassionate and non-preferential. What about badges? How are they identified? Well, you wear name tags or t-shirts representing your church. The church will only send those who are known, and only in pairs. What's in the orientation? First and foremost, how to be safe. What to say, what not to say. They're provided information to give to the survivors about the community response and the services available. They understand the reporting and referral mechanism. If they see something critical, how they can refer those people to a different source of help, or if necessary, report to that alternative source of help. They're trained on how to maintain boundaries. Now, the church's role in this is to communicate with the district and conference disaster leadership, recruit volunteers, gather up the materials, the information that's going to be given out. Who is providing what? Is the Red Cross doing this? Okay, they're doing this at this location. This group is providing meals here. This group is helping with cleanup. This group is doing something else. The local church will determine the areas to be reached, assuring that it is safe to walk about. The local church will provide the orientation and support in conjunction with district and conference leadership. It is important, whatever we do, that we connect in service. Disasters give us unparalleled opportunity to be and to answer our missional calling. Nothing could be more important to the God we serve and the communities around us than a loving response when human needs are at their most critical. We offer a hand or a resting place to a neighbor. We preach a sermon, as St. Francis said, that is much more powerful than words. Loving our neighbor into a new relationship with God by our actions and outreach is service and evangelism. What is your next step? Identify at least one disaster ministry. Initiate a preliminary plan of how you're going to do that. And identify the faith-based and other community partners that you will be working with. Now, please understand that this video series is an overview and that the interaction and the exercises of an actual workshop cannot be done in this media. If you are interested in having a workshop at your church, contact me. Here's my contact information. But the most important thing is if disaster strikes your community, be there. Be hope. Be the church.